was surprised that he was not surprised by what he saw. People still dug in the ruins of their homes, but even in the short time he had been there, more of them had begun to move with a sense of purpose. He could almost feel the growing determination. But, he wondered, they had seen Trollocs. Had they seen the black-cloaked rider? Had they felt his hatred? Nynaeve and Egwene appeared from the Calder house, and he sprang to his feet. Or rather, he tried to spring to his feet. It was more of a stumbling lurch that almost put him on his face in the dust. The Wisdom dropped to her knees beside the litter without giving him so much as a glance. Her face and dress were even dirtier than Egwene's, and the same dark circles lined her eyes, though her hands, too, were clean. She felt Tam's face and thumbed open his eyelids. With a frown, she pulled down the coverings and eased the bandage aside to look at the wound. Before Rand could see what lay underneath, she had replaced the wadded cloth. Sighing, she smoothed the blanket and cloak back up to Tam's neck with a gentle touch, as if tucking a child in for the night. "There's nothing I can do," she said. She had to put her hands on her knees to straighten up. "I'm sorry, Rand." For a moment he stood, not understanding, as she started back to the house. Then he scrambled after her and pulled her around to face him. "He's dying," he cried. "I know," she said simply, and he sagged with the matter-of-factness of it. "You have to do something. You have to. You're the Wisdom." Pain twisted her face, but only for an instant. Then she was all hollow-eyed resolve again, her voice emotionless and firm. "Yes, I am. I know what I can do with my medicines, and I know when it's too late. Don't you think I would do something if I could? But I can't. I can't, Rand. And there are others who need me. People I can help." "I brought him to you as quickly as I could," he mumbled. Even with the village in ruins, there had been the Wisdom for hope. With that gone, he was empty. "I know you did," she said gently. She touched his cheek with her hand. "It isn't your fault. You did the best anyone could."
Select a champion.
"I am sorry, Rand, but I have others to tend to. Our troubles are just beginning, I'm afraid." Vacantly, he stared after her until the door of the house closed behind her. He could not make any thought come, except that she would not help. Suddenly he was knocked back a step as Egwene cannoned into him, throwing her arms around him. Her hug was hard enough to bring a grunt from him any other time. Now he only looked silently at the door behind which his hopes had vanished. "I'm so sorry, Rand," she said against his chest.
Oh yeah, put the hat on.
"Light, I wish there was something I could do."
I like that hat.
Numbly, he put his arms around her. "I know. I have to do something, Egwene. I don't know what, but I can't just let him..." His voice broke, and she hugged him harder.
Right now?
"Egwene!" At Nynaeve's shout from the house, Egwene jumped. "Egwene, I need you! And wash your hands again!" She pushed herself free from Rand's arms. "She needs my help, Rand." "Egwene!" He thought he heard a sob as she spun away from him. Then she was gone, and he was left alone beside the litter. For a moment he looked down at Tam, feeling nothing but hollow helplessness. Suddenly his face hardened. "The mayor will know what to do," he said, lifting the shafts once more. "The mayor will know." Bran Elvir always knew what to do. With weary obstinacy, he set out for the Wine Spring Inn. Another of the Duran stallions passed him, its harness straps tied around the ankles of a big shape, draped with a dirty blanket. Arms covered with coarse hair dragged in the dirt behind the blanket, and one corner was pushed up to reveal a goat's horn. The Two Rivers was no place for stories to become horribly real. If Trollocs belonged anywhere, it was in the world outside, for places where they had Aes Sedai and false dragons, and the light alone knew what else come to life out of the tales of Gleeman. Not the Two Rivers, not Emond's Field. As he made his way down the green, people called to him, some from the ruins of their homes, asking if they could help. He heard them only as murmurs in the background, even when they walked alongside him for a distance as they spoke. Without really thinking about it, he managed words that said he needed no help, that everything was being taken care of. When they left him, with worried looks and sometimes a comment about sending Nynaeve to him, he noticed that just as little. All he let himself be aware of was the purpose he had fixed in his head. Bran Al'Vir could do something to help Tam. What that could be, he tried not to dwell on. But the mayor would be able to do something, to think of something.
Now that's out of the way. Let's
The inn had almost completely escaped the destruction that had taken half the village. A few scorch marks marred its walls, but the red roof tiles glittered in the sunlight as brightly as ever. All that was left of the peddler's wagon, though, were blackened iron wheel rims leaning against the charred wagon box, now on the ground. The big round hoops that had held up the canvas cover slanted crazily, each at a different angle. Tom Maryland sat cross-legged on the old foundation stones, carefully snipping singed edges from the patches on his cloak with a pair of small scissors. He set down cloak and scissors when Rand drew near. Without asking if Rand needed or wanted help, he hopped down and picked up the back of the litter.
Inside? Of course. Don't you worry, boy. Your wisdom will take care of him. I've watched her work since last night, and she has a deft touch and a sure skill. It could be a lot worse. Some died last night. Not many, perhaps, but any at all are too many for me. Old Fane just disappeared, and that's the worst of all. Trollocs will eat anything. You should thank the light your father's still here, and alive for the wisdom to heal.
Rand blotted out the words, "He is my father," reducing the voice to meaningless sound that he noticed no more than a fly's buzzing. He could not bear any more sympathy, any more attempts to boost his spirits. Not now. Not until Bran Al'Vere told him how to help Tam. Suddenly he found himself facing something scrawled on the inn door. A curving line scratched with a charred stick. A charcoal teardrop balanced on its point. So much had happened that it hardly surprised him to find the Dragon's Fang marked on the door of the Winespring Inn. Why anyone would want to accuse the innkeeper or his family of evil, or bring the inn bad luck, was beyond him. But the night had convinced him of one thing. Anything was possible. Anything at all. At a push from the Gleeman, he lifted the latch and went in. The common room was empty except for Bran Al'Vere, and cold too, for no one had found time to lay a fire. The mayor sat at one of the tables, dipping his pen in an inkwell with a frown of concentration on his face, and his gray-fringed head bent over a sheet of parchment. Nightshirt tucked hastily into his trousers. Bagging around his considerable waist, he absently scratched at one bare foot with the toes of the other. His feet were dirty, as if he had been outside more than once without bothering about boots, despite the cold.
What's your trouble?
He demanded without looking up.
Be quick with it. I have 24 things to do right this minute, and more that should have been done an hour ago. So I have little time or patience. Well, out with it.
Master Al'Vere, Rand said. It's my father. The mayor's head jerked up.
Rand! Tam!
He threw down the pen and knocked over his chair as he leaped up.
Perhaps the light hasn't abandoned us altogether. I was afraid you were both dead. Bella galloped into the village an hour after the Trollocs left, lathered and blowing as if she'd run all the way from the farm. And I thought, no time for that now. We'll take him upstairs.
He seized the rear of the litter, shouldering the Gleeman out of the way.
You go get the wisdom, Master Maryland, and tell her I said hurry, or I'll know the reason why. Rest easy, Tam. We'll soon have you in a good soft bed. Go, Gleeman, go!
Tom Maryland vanished through the doorway before Rand could speak. Nynaeve wouldn't do anything. She said she couldn't help him. I knew. I hoped you'd think of something. Master Al'Vere looked at Tam more sharply, then shook his head.
We'll see, boy. We'll see.
But he no longer sounded confident.
Let's get him into a bed. He can rest easy, at least.
Rand let himself be prodded toward the stairs at the back of the common room. He tried hard to keep his certainty that somehow Tam would be all right. But it had been thin to begin with, he realized, and the sudden doubt in the mayor's voice shook him. On the second floor of the inn, at the front, were half a dozen snug, well-appointed rooms with windows overlooking the green. Mostly they were used by the peddlers, or people down from Watch Hill or up from Devon Ride. But the merchants who came each year were often surprised to find such comfortable rooms. 3 of them were taken now, and the mayor hurried Rand to one of the unused ones. Quickly the down comforter and blankets were stripped back on the wide bed, and Tam was transferred to the thick feather mattress, with goose-down pillows tucked under his head. He made no sound beyond hoarse breathing as he was moved, not even a groan, but the mayor brushed away Rand's concern, telling him to set a fire to take the chill off the room. While Rand dug wood and kindling from the wood box next to the fireplace, Rand threw back the curtains on the room, letting in the morning light, then began to gently wash Tam's face. By the time the Gleeman returned, the blaze on the hearth was warming the room.
She will not come,
Tom Maryland announced as he stalked into the room. He glared at Rand, his bushy white brows drawing down sharply.
You didn't tell me she had seen him already. She almost took my head off.
I thought, I don't know, maybe the mayor could do something. Could make her see. Hands clenched in anxious fists, Rand turned from the fireplace to Bran. Master Al'Vere, what can I do? The rotund man shook his head helplessly. He laid a freshly dampened cloth on Tam's forehead and avoided meeting Rand's eye. I can't just watch him die, Master Alvear. I have to do something. The Gleeman shifted as if to speak. Rand rounded on him eagerly. Do you have an idea? I'll try anything.
I was just wondering,
Tom said, tamping his long-stemmed pipe with his thumb,
if the mayor knew who scrawled the dragon's fang on his door.
He peered into the bowl, then looked at Tam and replaced the unlit pipe between his teeth with a sigh.
Someone seems not to like him anymore. Or maybe it's his guests they don't like.
Rand gave him a disgusted look and turned away to stare into the fire. His thoughts danced like the flames, and like the flames, they concentrated fixedly on one thing. He would not give up. He could not just stand there and watch Tam die. My father, he thought fiercely. My father. Once the fever was gone, that could be cleared up as well. But the fever first. Only how? Ran Alvear's mouth tightened as he looked at Rand's back, and the glare he directed at the Gleeman would have given a bear pause, but Tom just waited expectantly, as if he had not noticed it. It's probably the work of one of the Congers or a Coplin, the mayor said finally, though the light alone knows which. They're a large brood, and if there's ill to be said of someone, or even if there isn't, they'll say it. They make Sen Bui sound honey-tongued.
That wagon load who came in just before dawn?
The Gleeman asked.
They hadn't so much as smelled a Trolloc. And all they wanted to know was when festival was going to start, as if they couldn't see half the village in ashes.
Killing spree.
Master Alvear nodded grimly. One branch of the family, but none of them are very different. That fool Darl Coplin spent half the night demanding I put Mistress Moraine and the Master Lan out of the inn, out of the village, as if there would be any village at all left without them. Rand had only half listened to the conversation, but this last tugged him to speak. What did they do? Why, she called ball lightning out of the clear night sky, Master Alvear replied. Sent it darting straight at the Trollocs.
Come on.
You've seen trees shattered by it. The Trollocs stood it no better. Moraine? Rand said incredulously, and the mayor nodded.
9, 8,
Mistress Moraine.
7,
And Master Lan was a whirlwind with that sword of his.
4.
His sword! The man himself is a weapon, and in 10 places at once, or so it seemed. Burned me, but I still wouldn't believe it if I couldn't step outside and see. He rubbed a hand over his bald head. Winter night visits just beginning, our hands full of presents and honey cakes and our heads full of wine. Then the dogs snarling, and suddenly the two of them burst out of the inn, running through the village shouting about Trollocs. I thought they'd had too much wine. After all, Trollocs? Then, before anyone knew what was happening, those things were right in the streets with us, slashing at people with their swords, torching houses, howling to freeze a man's blood. He made a sound of disgust in his throat. We just ran like chickens with a fox in the hen yard till Master Lan put some backbone into us.
No need to be so hard,
Tom said.
You did as well as anyone could.
Not every Trolloc lying out there fell to the two of them. Yes, well, Master Alvear gave himself a shake. It's still almost too much to believe.
Okay.
An Aes Sedai in Emmonsfield, and Master Lan is a warder. An Aes Sedai? Rand whispered. She can't be. I talked to her. She isn't. She doesn't.
Capture point spawning in
Did you think they
15
wore
seconds.
signs? The mayor said wryly. Aes Sedai painted across their backs, and maybe danger, stay away? Suddenly he slapped his forehead.
4,
Aes Sedai.
2,
I'm an old fool and losing my wits. There's a chance, Rand, if you're willing to take it. I can't tell you to do it, and I don't know if I'd have the nerve if it were me. A chance? Rand said. I'll take any chance if it'll help. Aes Sedai can heal, Rand. Burn me, lad, you've heard the stories. They can cure where medicines fail. Gleeman, you should have remembered that better than I. Gleeman's tales are full of Aes Sedai. Why didn't you speak up instead of letting me flail around?
I'm a stranger here,
Tom said, looking longingly at his unlit pipe.
and Goodman Coplin isn't the only one who wants nothing to do with Aes Sedai.
Enemy killing spree.
Best the idea came from you.
Aes Sedai, Rand muttered, trying to make the woman who had smiled at him fit the stories. Help from an Aes Sedai was sometimes worse than no help at all, so the stories said, like poison in a pie. And their gifts always had a hook in them, like fish bait. Suddenly the coin in his pocket, the coin Moraine had given him, seemed like a burning coal. It was all he could do not to rip it out of his coat and throw it out the window. Nobody wants to get involved with Aes Sedai, lad. the mayor said slowly.
It is the only chance I can see, but it's still no small decision. I cannot make it for you, but I have seen nothing but good from Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai, I should call her, I suppose.
Is that good?
Sometimes, he gave a meaningful look at Tam, you have to take a chance, even if it's a poor one. Some of the stories are exaggerated in a way, Tom added, as if the words were being dragged from him. Some of them. Besides, boy, what choice do you have?
None, Rand sighed. Tam still had not moved a muscle. His eyes were sunken as if he had been sick a week. I'll go find her.
The other side of the bridges, the Gleeman said, where they are disposing of the dead Trollocs. But be careful, boy. Aes Sedai do what they do for reasons of their own, and they aren't always the reasons others think.
The last was a shout that followed Rand through the door. He had to hold on to the sword hilt to keep the scabbard from tangling in his legs as he ran, but he would not take the time to remove it. He clattered down the stairs and dashed out of the inn, tiredness forgotten for the moment. A chance for Tam, however small, was enough to overcome a night without sleep, for a time at least. That the chance came from an Aes Sedai, or what the price of it might be, he did not want to consider. And as for actually facing an Aes Sedai, he took a deep breath and tried to move faster. The bonfire stood well beyond the last houses to the north on the west side of the road to Watch Hill. The wind still carried the oily black columns of smoke away from the village, but even so, a sickly sweet stink filled the air, like a roast left hours too long on the spit.
30 seconds remaining.
Rand gagged at the smell, then swallowed hard when he realized its source. A fine thing to do with Beltane fires. The men tending the fires had cloths tied over their noses and mouths, but their grimaces made it plain the vinegar dampening the cloths was not enough. Even if it did kill the stench, they still knew the stench was there, and they still knew what they were doing.
7,
Two of the men were untying the harness straps of one of the big Durans from a Trolloc's ankles.
1.
Lan, squatting beside the body, had tossed back the blanket enough to reveal the Trolloc's shoulders and goat-snouted head. As Rand trotted up, the warder unfastened a metal badge, a blood-red enameled trident, from one spiked shoulder of the Trolloc's shirt of black mail. Kobol, he announced. He bounced the badge on his palm and snatched it out of the air with a growl. That makes 7 bands so far. Moraine, seated cross-legged on the ground a short distance off, shook her head tiredly. A walking staff covered from end to end in carved vines and flowers lay across her knees, and her dress had the rumpled look of having been worn too long. 7 bands. 7. That many have not acted together since the Trolloc Wars.
15 seconds.
Bad news piles on bad news. I'm afraid, Lan. I thought we had gained a march, but we may be further behind than ever.
5.
Rand
4,
stared at her, unable to
3,
speak.
2.
An Aes Sedai. He had been trying to convince himself that she would not look any different now that he knew what he was looking at, and to his surprise, she did not. She was no longer quite so pristine, not with wisps of her hair sticking out in all directions, and a faint streak of soot across her nose, yet not really different either. Surely there must be something about an Aes Sedai to mark her for what she was. On the other hand, if outward appearance reflected what was inside, and if the stories were true, then she should look closer to a Trolloc than to a more than handsome woman whose dignity was not dented by sitting in the dirt. And she could help Tam. Whatever the cost, there was that before anything else. He took a deep breath. Mistress Moraine. Moraine Sedai. Both turned to look at him, and he froze under her gaze.
Enemy double kill.
Not the calm, smiling gaze he remembered from the green. Her face was tired, but her dark eyes were a hawk's eyes. Aes Sedai, breakers of the world, puppeteers who pulled strings and made thrones and nations dance in designs only the women from Tar Valon knew. A little more light in the darkness, the Aes Sedai murmured. She raised her voice. How are your dreams, Randall Thor? He stared at her. My dreams? A night like that can give a man bad dreams, Rand. If you have nightmares, you must tell me of it. I can help with bad dreams, sometimes. There's nothing wrong with my... It's my father. He's hurt. It's not much more than a scratch, but the fever is burning him up. The wisdom won't help. She says she can't. But the stories... She raised an eyebrow, and he stopped and swallowed hard.
No.
Light. Is there a story with an Aes Sedai where she isn't a villain? He looked at the warder, but Lan appeared more interested in the dead Trolloc than in anything Rand might say. Fumbling his way under her eyes, he went on. It said Aes Sedai can heal. If you can help him, anything you can do for him, whatever the cost. I mean... He took a deep breath and finished up in a rush. I'll pay any price in my power if you help him. Anything. Any price, Moraine mused, half to herself. We will speak of prices later, Rand, if at all. I can make no promises.